being held captive by a large venomous snake and nearly suffocating in quicksand. After hitching overland from Europe, he was initially rejected at the Indian border for being another useless beggar. But a promise to a border guard set him on his way. 40 years later, Radhanath Swami is one of India's premier spiritual leaders. He has communed with spiritual leaders such as the Dalai Lama and lived and worked with others, including Mother Teresa. His public appearances draw thousands of followers, and he was recently invited for a private audience with the President of India. Loyal supporters donate millions of dollars each year, all of which are used to head up some of the most highly regarded community service projects. From the formation of a massive food distribution center for indigent children, to emergency relief programs, to the creation of an orphanage, an eye clinic, and a hospital. His contributions to India are so vast, they have earned him celebrity-like status. And yet Radhanath Swami's life is anything but glamorous. As a Swami, or monk exclusively dedicated to God's services, he has taken vows of poverty, celibacy, and abstinence from intoxicants. He has no property, no bank account, and not a penny to his name. But he has found the one thing so many strive to achieve, the path to enlightenment. Radhanath Swami travels in Asia, Europe, and America, teaching devotional wisdom and conducting seminars in top universities and corporations on varied topics like leadership, stress management, relationship management, and yoga. The Journey Home is an extraordinary memoir in which the author weaves a colorful tapestry of adventure, mysticism, and love. He teaches us that it is not important if you are a Hindu, a Muslim, a Christian, or a Jew, but whether or not you can love yourself and every living being. As one reviewer said about his book, this book is a profound story of Radhanath Swami's journey from the material world of temptation, attachment, and several difficulties to the innermost innocent spiritual awakening. Welcome, Radhanath Swami.
Whatever you said, very good. Janachalakaya Chakshuruntamjena Asmai Sri Gurudev Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patithanam Bhavanibhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanda Radha Kanda Namostute Bhakta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sudevi Pranamami Hari Priya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sri Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. This is the most wonderful bookstore I've ever seen. So grateful and so honored to have this opportunity to
stage there. Shiva, yeah. So grateful to all of you for I'm just remembering here in the Bodhi Tree bookstore 49 years ago when I was sitting from sunrise to sunset every day under the original Bodhi tree. Have any of you been there before? There's a very holy place in India, the Bihar state, named Gaya, which has been a place of pilgrimage for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And just the outskirts of Gaya, Lord Buddha sat under a peepal tree and was determined he would not get up until he attained his life. And he was tempted in every possible way. He remained committed to his goal in life. And that is where Buddha attained enlightenment. From there he went to the deer park in Sarnath, where he met his old classmates in asceticism. He began the Buddha. I remember, could everyone hear me? Could you hear me now? I remember when I was sitting under that Bodhi tree, meditating on Buddha, how he was a prince with royal luxuries. All he had to do was just keep living, and he would have been the king. He didn't have to do anything else but breathe, and he would have been the king of a massive empire. But he saw the sufferings of old age, of disease, of death, of the anxiety of the mind and the body, anxieties caused by other living beings, anxieties caused by natural disturbances. And he wanted to find a happiness that could not be marred by all of these things. So he left the royal luxuries of his palace, seeking inner wealth, which culminated under the Bodhi tree, where he found that inner wealth. And after that, even the greatest kings would come to him, asking him for his wealth. Not material wealth, but spiritual wealth. And a boy coming from the northern suburbs of Chicago, where I was born and raised, to think that material things could bring real happiness. To meditate on the life of Buddha was very much a shift in priorities. He had everything. He was looking for something else. What are we really looking for? So this book, The Journey Home, is a story which talks about one little person's search for that inner fulfillment. I'll be honest with you, I never wanted. In fact, from the time of this journey, on occasions I would share some stories with people, and over a course of 30 years, so many people were asking me, you should write a book. And my answer was always the same: I will never write a book. And I had two reasons why I did not want to write a book about this. One is I was thinking in my heart that it's an act of arrogance to write a book about myself, where every page will be filled with I, me, and mine words. And second of all, I was thinking if I actually wrote what really happened, I don't think anybody will believe it's true. So I crossed that out of my options in life until something happened that changed my mind. May I share it with you? One of my very dearest friends, his name was Bodhi Swami. I'd like to go a little into his background. Very special person. He was born the same year as me in 1950. He was African American. He was born in the ghettos of Cleveland, Ohio. And during the 50s and 60s, if you were of that descent, born in the ghetto, it was almost for sure hopeless that you would live the rest of your life and die in the ghetto. There was very little equal opportunity. Although the Constitution gives rights, for all practical purposes, serious prejudice. I remember when I was 16, I worked a job for myself and my friend Gary. We worked, and everybody with us were African Americans from the south side of Chicago. And we saw how they suffered. And it deeply affected my heart. Why? Bhakti Swami, he was just such a compassionate person who was so absolutely positive, even as a child. He had a disease called stammering. Not a disease, but he stammered. Every time he tried to talk in public, he'd go blah, 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 like that. But whenever he would talk about spiritual subjects, he could speak nicely. His brothers and sisters have told me this. But because of his kindness, his positiveness, his hopefulness, and his endeavors, he got a full scholarship and graduated from Princeton University. He was a civil rights leader at Princeton, in that part of the country. But he was looking for something even greater than that. And he turned to spirituality and became a world spiritual teacher. Tens and thousands of followers, about 20 books he wrote. Some of the people who would take advice from him were Nelson Mandela, Muhammad Ali, and Alice Coltrane. In about, I think it was 2005, he called me to his bedside in rural Pennsylvania. He was dying of melanoma cancer. He called me and said, I think I only have 3 days more to live. Please come. So I came. And I had a lot of pressing appointments. So I stayed with him a day and a half. And I was about to tell him that I had to leave. But before I could say anything, he said, please stay with me. I want to die in your arms. So I canceled everything. And he lived another 8 weeks. But I can honestly say that I've never had a friendship with deeper intimacy and love than during those 8 weeks. Exclusively on inspiring and enlightening each other spiritually. And when a spiritual purpose, or when God is in the center between us, how it can bring our souls together. We really became one. in our affection, in our love, in our care for each other, for the body, the mind, and the soul. It was actually incredible. What a relation can do when there's no selfishness, but we're genuinely trying to share the gift of love for God with each other. One example. One day I came into his room, and he couldn't walk because he was emaciated. He had tumors all over his body. He was paralyzed from the waist down. So there was a bag where his urine was going, and it was red. They said he had blood in his urine. So we spoke for a couple hours that day, and just at the end of our talk, he said to me, with such feeling, he said, I can't tell you how much it means to me that you're with me at this time in my life. He said, it really feels like you're going through everything I'm going through with me. And to have a brother or a sister that's going through these challenges with me gives so much meaning to it. And I said, Maharaj, I said, I really am going through this with you. Now, I didn't know what I was saying. So I came to the house I was staying at, and I lifted the seat of the toilet to pass urine, and it was bright red. Now, I eat beets every day, and it's never happened like that. It actually, our hearts were so much together that what he was going through really was, and the day that he departed from the world, I was as sick as he was. Somehow or other, I'm still around now. The physical is very much a manifestation of the mental state. And the mental state is very much affected by our spiritual state. One day when I was with him, he was in so much pain. His whole body was trembling because of the pain. And usually we would discuss spiritual subjects. There was one verse of a great saintly person, of one particular prayer that he was singing when he was in the last days of his life. And we would read that prayer together and then speak on that prayer for several hours every day. We go in all kinds of directions, but it was focused on that prayer. But this day, I could see he couldn't concentrate. The pain was so intense. So I just started to chant, like Kamini and Kaminiya and Keshavat. And he started singing with me. And suddenly, the most blissful smile manifested on his face. He was practically smiling from one ear to the other. And his eyes were glistening in joy, and tears of ecstasy flowing from his eyes. And he shook his head. And he said, it doesn't get any better than this. Now, his body was still shaking from the pain. That didn't change. He said, I would not change my position for anyone else in the world, because today I am tasting the sweetness of God's name like I've never tasted before. It's just a token, small price for this experience I'm feeling within. This was Bhakti Tirtha Swami. Just giving himself to others completely. Even when people would come to to give him some encouragement. And it would end up that he would console them and solve all their problems, and they would go out very happy. Almost every person that came out of his room would be weeping. They were touched so deeply. At one time there was a room full of about 25 people, and they all came out weeping. Lives changed. And I said to him, "How did you do that? I've known you for 35 years. I've never saw you do this to people." And he said, "You see this disease?" He said, "This is facilitating me to serve people in a much deeper way." He said, "I'm grateful to have it." One day, he looked at me. He was laying in his bed and I was sitting at his side. And he said, "Swamiji, you should write this book about your travels." And I said, "I will not write this book." And he said, "Why?" And I explained all the reasons I just told you. He said, "Get out of your illusion." He said, "This is not your story. This is God's story. About how God took a young man on a journey in search of what everyone is looking for in this world, in one way or another. In search of inner fulfillment, inner meaning in life. And how he put you through so many extraordinary experiences to find that. He said, if your story will give hope or inspiration to anyone, then it is an act of arrogance for you not to write it. In fact, you are arrogant and miserly." And then he looked up at me with very innocent, childlike eyes and took my hand and squeezed it and said, "Promise me on my deathbed that you will write and publish this book." What would you do?
I wouldn't do that.
Special effects. Almost right at the climax. So I promised him. But then over the next few days, I was thinking of ways to convince him to retract the promise. And he left. He passed away with several hundred people at his bedside singing kirtan of the holy names, weeping tears of prayers of love for him, helping to him. He didn't need help, but it was just an act of love for everyone to come together, to be chanting and praying as his soul departed from his body. It is the story of a young boy born in Chicago, brought up about 30 miles north in a small town, who spent teenage years in the 1960s. It was a time of great transition in America. There was literally a war between two generations, the counterculture and their parents. There was a Vietnam War. And now people are very disturbed about the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War. But in those days there was a draft. And every single man, unless you had some way out, which I didn't, when you turned 18, you were eligible for the draft. And if you were drafted, you had three choices. Go and fight and kill or be killed for something you do not believe in, or go to jail and have your name blacklisted for the rest of your life, or illegally escape the country. Those were the three choices. That's the way it was presented to us. So this brought about a very, very personal concern about this war. And I remember in the Grand Park of Chicago, I think it was 1968, I was in a peaceful demonstration to question whether we should be in Vietnam. And I was tear gassed and chased by club-swinging police who I was told were protecting my freedom. And seeing the plight of the African American people, I was part of Martin Luther King's civil rights movement. I remember in the South, I was marching, and there were bottles and stones and curse words hurled at me by my white brothers and sisters. I believe it was Martin Luther King who said, if you do not have an ideal that you're willing to die for, you don't really have anything meaningful to live for. And I yearned to find that ideal in my life. And I read Gandhiji, Mahatma Gandhi, because I saw so many problems within the world, so many things that I just didn't think was right. And he said, we should be the change that we want to see in the world. We should be the change that we want to see in others. Things like this, and some of the music of the 60s, and my own explorations gradually led me on a spiritual path. Myself and my very dearest friend in life, we grew up from maybe 7 or 8 years old. We became really good friends in high school because we had a lot that we shared. One day, this friend named Gary, who by the way now lives in Malibu Beach, he called me and he said, we are going on a trip to Europe. You must come with us. I said, I have no money. How am I going to go? I have a job set up this summer. This is 19 years old we were. He said, I don't have any money either, but Frank is going to sponsor both of us. I said, all right, I'll go. So Frank sponsored both of us, and we got a $65 flight. I think it was that. And then it went on to Luxembourg. And the first night we stayed in a camping ground in a tent. First night. We woke up the next morning. You can't imagine how happy we were. For the first time in our lives, we were in another country, a foreign land, without any supervision. We were totally free. And as I was savoring the fresh air and the prospect of what was ahead of us, I heard this shriek. And out from the tent came Frank, who told us he had been robbed of all of his money. All he had left was his return flight. And he said, come, we have to all go because there's no money left. And Gary and I looked at each other. And we said goodbye to Frank. We couldn't believe it. thinking, now I'm as free as this stream. Wherever destiny takes me, I'm ready to go. And Gary and I, we were on a spiritual search. First, we were associating with the counterculture in Amsterdam and London and other places. We went to the Isle of Wight Rock Festival. And I remember the music was playing. It was so loud. It was the biggest rock festival of our whole generation, much bigger than Woodstock even, the Isle of Wight. And every big band in the West was there. And as the amplifiers were pounding out this music, it seemed like the scattering the cloud, shaking the mountains and stirring the sea. But there was something much louder happening in my heart. There was this silent call that was so loud I couldn't even hear the music, calling me away from it all. I started going to monasteries, synagogues, cathedrals. Gary and I would spend whole days in art museums trying to find spiritual symbolism in art. Trying to find ourselves, trying to find a higher connection. And eventually it led us through Italy, through Greece, where we were on the Isle of Crete. And we lived in a cave together. And I would climb a mountain, and from sunrise to sunset, I would meditate, read spiritual books, and pray. And Gary was doing the same thing on the seashore. After some weeks, the intensity of my thirst for spiritual experience became so overwhelming. What began as a small spark was now a blazing fire, which burned away and evaporated my aspiration for anything else. And I remember that day crying for direction, because I really didn't know which way to go. Right as the sun was setting, I heard a voice from within, a silent voice that was so loud that it changed my life. I knew if I followed this calling, I would never be the same. That voice spoke 3 words: go to India. I never met an Indian. I never had Indian food. I didn't know where India was. I had no money, and I didn't even have a map. But I was determined to go. I went back to the cave where Gary was sitting in meditation. He looked at me.